It's morning again in America. Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history. With interest rates at about half the record highs of 1980, nearly 2,000 families today will buy new homes, more than at any time in the past 4 years. This afternoon, 6,500 young men and women will be married. And with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence to the future. It's morning again in America. And under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better. Why would we ever want to return to where we were less than 4 short years ago?
In hindsight of American history, few names evoke as much reverence, controversy, and nostalgia as Ronald Reagan, the 40th President of the United States, lesser known as the famous Hollywood actor. Reagan's presidency from 1981 to 1989 marked a pivotal era of conservative resurgence, economic reforms, changes in African American society, and significant shifts in science and technology policy. The things he did with good intentions may not have been as helpful as they were harmful, and it is even more apparent with his dealing in scientific research and progression.
But the reason we're here, of course, is to talk about the superconducting super collider, as you've probably guessed already.
One of the most ambitious scientific undertakings of his administration was the superconducting supercollider, or the SSC for short, a project emblematic of Reagan's vision for American technological dominance and scientific leadership. The SSC, envisioned as the world's largest particle accelerator, was poised to revolutionize our understanding of fundamental physics, spanning a massive 54 miles in circumference. Located near Waxahachie, Texas, the collider promised to propel the United States to the forefront of high-energy physics research. Reagan advocated for the construction of this high-energy physics research facility with a price tag initially estimated at around $4.4 billion. The SSC aimed to probe the mysteries of subatomic particles, potentially uncovering groundbreaking discoveries in particle physics. The SSC was also supposed to promise American technological superiority through being the first people to discover the last remaining subatomic particles, using this, what was supposed to be the world's biggest particle accelerator in the world. However, the saga of the SSC is not merely a story of scientific ambition, but it is also a cautionary tale of political maneuvering, fiscal constraints, and shifting priorities. Despite Reagan's initial endorsement and enthusiastic support, the SSC encountered mounting opposition and bureaucratic hurdles. As the project faced escalating costs and skepticism from Congress, its fate became increasingly uncertain. Ultimately, in 1993, the SSC met its demise when Congress voted to terminate funding for the project due to it going over its allowed budget of $11 billion at the time, which they had worked so hard to obtain, with Congress only deciding to grant them this money just a few years before.
Tonight, I am directing NASA to develop a permanently manned space station and to do it within a decade.
One of the biggest reasons Reagan had shifted his focus from this project was because he had his eyes set on a bigger fish. In fact, one of the biggest fishes in his entire career. He wanted to establish an international space station. Not just any international space station, the international space station that we know today. The International Space Station project had an approved budget that trumped the SSC's final approved budget by about 15 times. The decision to cancel the SSC project sent shockwaves through the scientific community and sparked debates about the role in government in funding basic research, the feasibility of large-scale scientific endeavors, and the long-term implications of such decisions for American innovation and competitiveness. However, it does show how space travel continued to dominate the scientific focus since the space race era of the 50s and 60s. Reagan put forward a proposal of $150 billion to the ISS project, and it only took a decade of construction for this massive scale project to be completed. All the focus on space travel and exploring the cosmos kind of left the focus on researching how our own world works in the dust. And projects like the SSC and other stuff that may have gotten passed by Congress but were severely underfunded due to bureaucratic scrutiny and bias, shifting the views on technology to the sky and space instead of our own backyards, which we still know really nothing about. Reagan tried to help the American people with a lot of things, but just like how the SSC failed, some of the things that he tried sounded good in theory. However, in practice, almost everything that he had implemented to help American people ended up backfiring and a complete failure by worsening the economy and the lives and pretty much everything about a lot of the communities within America.
I regret to say that we're in the worst economic mess since the Great Depression.
Reaganomics. The economic policies pushed by President Ronald Reagan during his reign of America represented a departure from the Keynesian economy that had dominated for decades at this point. Rooted in the principles of supply side economics, Reaganomics advocated for tax cuts, deregulation, and tight monetary policy as the keys to stimulating economic growth and curbing inflation. While proponents heralded Reaganomics as a blueprint for prosperity and renewed American dynamism, its legacy tells a completely different story. Reaganomics was far from delivering on its promises, engendered a host of detrimental effects on the economy, including exacerbating income inequality, ballooning national debt, and fostering a climate of financial instability. Reaganomics initiated a dramatic shift in the distribution of wealth, disproportionately benefiting the wealthy while leaving many working class Americans behind. The hallmark of Reagan's economic policies was massive tax cuts, particularly for the highest income brackets. By slashing the top marginal tax rate from 70 to 28%, Reagan unleashed a wave of wealth accumulation among the affluent, widening the gap between the rich and poor. The trickle down theory, central to Reaganomics, posited that tax cuts for the wealthy should spur investment, job creation, and ultimately benefit all sectors of society. However, the reality proved starkly different, as income inequality soared to levels not seen since the Gilded Age of America, with the wealthiest 1% capturing an ever larger share of national income. He also managed to worsen inflation. Despite promises of fiscal responsibility, Reaganomics presided over ballooning national debt that cast a long shadow over future generations. While proponents argued that tax cuts would pay for themselves through increased economic activity, the reality fell far short of expectations. The combination of tax cuts, increased military spending, and inadequate revenue streams led to chronic deficits, driving the national debt from $997 billion in 1981 to $2.85 trillion by the end of Reagan's presidency. The reliance on deficit spending to finance tax cuts and military buildup not only settled the nation with a mountain of debt, but also undermined long-term economic stability, leaving future generations to grapple with the consequences of fiscal irresponsibility. This irresponsibility led to instability, and this instability deconstructed so much of what had been built during the New Deal. Reaganomics contributed to a climate of financial deregulation and speculation that laid groundwork for economic crisis. Reagan's deregulatory agenda, epitomized by the dismantling of the New Deal era financial regulations such as the Glass-Steagall Act, unleashed the forces of Wall Street with minimal oversight. The savings and loan crisis of the late 1980s, fueled by risky lending practices and speculative excesses, exposed the perils of deregulation and lax oversight. Moreover, Reagan's laissez-faire approach to financial markets paved the way for unchecked growth of financial conglomerates and the emergence of too-big-to-fail institutions, setting the stage for the 2008 financial meltdown. Reaganomics left a legacy of economic mismanagement and inequality that continues to reverberate through the American economy. By prioritizing tax cuts for the wealthy, neglecting the mounting national debt, and deregulating financial markets, Reagan's economic policies exacerbated income inequality, undermined fiscal stability, and sowed the seeds of financial crisis. Reagan created this plan to have a trickle-down effect on the economy. However, this only made the rich richer and the poor stayed ever poorer. This specifically heavily impacted the African Americans who were already poor and discriminated against in the workplace, which caused them to get paid less than a white working man. Um, well, eventually, a man would publish a book which slipped through federal regulations, and in this book lied the recipe to create one of the most notorious narcotics to have ever existed.
Today, there's a new epidemic, smokable cocaine, otherwise known as crack.
War on drugs. A policy launched during Reagan's presidency and intensified in the subsequent decades imposed to combat drug abuse and trafficking in the United States. But beneath its veneer of public health and safety showed a troubling reality. The war on drugs disproportionately targeted and devastated African American communities. It worsened social inequalities, perpetuated systematic racism, inflicted lasting harm on African American individuals and families and communities. Central to the war on drugs was the escalation of punitive measures, including harsh sentencing laws and mandatory minimum sentences, disproportionately affecting African Americans yet again. Despite similar rates of drug use across racial groups, African American communities were subject to arrest, prosecution, incarceration, showing vastly disproportionate rates. Racial profiling and biased law enforcement practices fueled the mass incarceration of African Americans, and as a result, African American communities bore the brunt of the burgeoning prison industrial complex, with devastating consequences for families, social cohesion, and economic mobility. This quote-unquote war eroded civil liberties that subjected African Americans to pervasive surveillance, profiling, and harassment. The proliferation of militarized policing tactics, such as no-knock raids and acid forfeiture, targeted predominantly low-income neighborhoods, perpetuating a climate of fear and mistrust. The expansion of stop-and-frisk policies, ostensibly aimed at reducing drug-related crime, disproportionately ensnared individuals in a cycle of suspicion and surveillance, undermining their rights and privacy and due process. Intergenerational trauma ruptured the social fabric of black communities and was a major result of the war on drugs. The disproportionate incarceration of African American fathers and mothers disrupted families, leaving children to navigate the perils of poverty, instability, and parental absence, which ends up continuing the cycle as the already poor children may pick up selling drugs as a teen or young adult, leading to a low education level, dropping out of school to sell crack, only to get arrested and sentenced to years with no parole if they weren't already subject to police brutality or, in many cases, police fatality. Between the 80s and 90s, the prevalence of African American children living with only their mother increased from 20% in the 60s to over 50% across the nation. Drugs ruled the lives of most people within the African community, and it rooted itself within the innermost walls of the government. The war on drugs was one of the worst and violent things put in place by Reagan. However, there existed another war. This one was a little bit more literal than superficial, and led to even more problems and trouble within the borders of American ideals. The idea that
The United States does not negotiate with terrorists.
kind of got thrown out the window with this affair, and all for some small financial gain to fuel the destructions and quote-unquote liberation of other countries under communist regime.
The 39 Americans held hostage for 17 days by terrorists in Lebanon are free, safe, and at this moment on their way to Frankfurt, Germany. They'll be home again soon.
The Iran-Contra scandal stands as one of the darkest chapters in American political history. Further tarnishing the legacy of Ronald Reagan's presidency, the scandal unfolded during his second term in office and exposed the clandestine and illegal scheme that violated both domestic and international law. At the heart of the Iran-Contra scandal was the Reagan administration's flagrant disregard for constitutional principles and the rule of law. The scheme involved in the coveted sales of arms to Iran, despite the long-standing arms embargo, in exchange for the release of American hostages in Lebanon. Additionally, proceeds from these arms sales were funneled to fund the Contras, anti-communist rebels fighting in the Sandinista government in Nicaragua, in direct contravention of the Boland Amendment, which prohibited U.S. government assistance to the Contras. By bypassing congressional authority and engaging in secret illegal activities, Reagan undermined the constitutional checks and balances that are fundamental to American democracy. The Iran-Contra affair exposed a culture of secrecy and deception within the Reagan administration, eroding democratic accountability and transparency. Reagan and his senior officials, including National Security Council staff, operated outside the bounds of official channels, bypassing congressional oversight and public scrutiny. The covert nature of the operation shielded it from public scrutiny, denying the American people their right to hold the government accountable for its actions. Furthermore, the administration's efforts to conceal the truth through falsified records and misleading statements further undermined the integrity of the presidency and eroded public trust in government institutions. Reagan's involvement in the Iran-Contra scandal normalized a culture of lawlessness and impunity within the highest echelons of government. Despite revelations of illegal conduct and wrongdoing, Reagan evaded personal accountability, deflecting blame onto subordinates and portraying himself as unaware of the scheme's details. This lack of accountability sent a dangerous message that those in power could act with impunity, undermining the rule of law and fostering a climate of moral relativism within the executive branch. The Iran-Contra scandal represents a dark chapter in American history, revealing the extent to which the Reagan administration was willing to subvert democratic principles and engage in illegal clandestine activities. Reagan's involvement in the Iran-Contra affair constituted a betrayal of American values, undermining constitutional principles, democratic accountability, and the rule of law.
My fellow Americans, this is the 34th time I'll speak to you from the Oval Office, and the last. We've been together 8 years now, and soon it'll be time for me to go. But before I do, I wanted to share some thoughts, some of which I've been saving for a long time.
Ronald Reagan's presidency was characterized by a mixture of ambitious scientific endeavors, economic policies, law enforcement initiatives, and scandalous practices within the executive branch, each leaving a distinct mark on American society. While Reagan's administration pursued groundbreaking scientific projects like the superconducting super collider, aimed at bolstering American scientific leadership, it also implemented policies that disproportionately harmed vulnerable communities. The SSC, envisioned as a pioneering particle accelerator, symbolized Reagan's aspiration for American technological dominance. However, despite its potential scientific advancements, the project faced bureaucratic hurdles and escalating costs, as well as focus shifting on a space project, ultimately leading to its termination. Reaganomics, ostensibly aimed at stimulating economic growth, exacerbated income inequality, ballooned the national debt, and fostered financial instability. Additionally, the war on drugs intensified systematic racism, perpetuated mass incarceration, and inflicted intergenerational trauma, particularly on African American communities. Reagan's presidency was also marred by scandal, notably the Iran-Contra affair, which imposed a culture of secrecy, deception, and disregard for constitutional principles, undermining democratic accountability and eroding public trust in government institutions. In assessing Reagan's presidency, it becomes evident that his decisions and policies had far-reaching detrimental consequences for America and its people. Reagan had high hopes and aspirations and pushed his policies with good theories. However, they ended up falling apart in practice and ended up doing more harm than they ever did good. He tried to push American society further by taking risk and betting on losing horses, hoping that he would be able to benefit from it. However, we only got the consequences from his actions throughout and lingering even after his presidency. Just about almost all of the research in this video was done by my partner James through sources such as the Department of Energy, the Miller Center, the National Library of Medicine, and the Bill of Rights Institute, but also a bunch of other different places, as well as the script for this being structured with the help of like ChatGPT, because I cannot for the life of me put together the jumbled up information that was just thrown into a separate Google document. This video was recorded and edited by me because, yeah. So, yeah, thanks for watching. I'm sorry for any confusing parts, but I've only had maybe 4 hours of sleep, like total, working on this. Yeah. Thanks for watching.
And so, goodbye, God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.